Welcome to Kolme Group's Clarisn Function in a Flash, where each episode will introduce you to a new Clarisn function and show you how to use it. Hi, I'm Kim, one of the founders of Kolme Group. I've been working with Clarisn since about 2015, and I'm really excited to work with you today and show you this function.
And I'm Kyle. I am an MBA in international business, and I've run projects all over the world. I'm fluent in French, Spanish, and Clarisn, and I love teaching others all three of these languages.
Let's talk about
DateSubtract.
DateSubtract. All right, Kyle. I really like this function. It can be really handy. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so DateSubtract is a function that returns the amount of time between two dates or date fields in Clarisn as a duration. It's useful because sometimes you want to see the difference between two dates in the system.
Right. So maybe I want to understand how many days there are between a due date and the last, I don't know, the start date. I guess you have duration there, but you can do that kind of calculation on things like requests and other types of objects. I might also have dates. Maybe I have the last time I updated a project and then the due date or the current date.
So an example use case would be to see if there is a built-in buffer between a due date and a promise date.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, and it's really just simple math. I've got date one, date two, and I look at the difference between those and I return those. Now, in looking at the syntax, we've got date subtract, parentheses, and then we have the first value, which is a date or a date time one, and then the next one is a date time two. And then we have a flag called is working. Can you tell us about how that flag works, is working?
So with DateSubtract, it's going to return to you the number of days or the duration between the two dates. However, the system is going to want to know, are we taking into consideration working days or calendar days? So if the third parameter is true, the system knows that you are trying to calculate working days. And if the parameter is false, the system knows you are looking for calendar days.
That's pretty handy because if we look at another function, dateDiff, that function only returns calendar days. And so if you just want to know how many working days or what is my working duration I have between two dates or date times, I can't do that with dateDiff. And that's a big value that DateSubtract can give us, doesn't it?
Exactly. And if you look at the syntax in an example, DateSubtract with committed date, due date, and true, this is going to allow you to see how much time there is between the delivery date of when we promise the customer and the due date that our work breakdown structures tells us that it will be finished. Because the is working Boolean is set to true, it's returning the value in working days per our org settings and not calendar days.
Right. So this could almost calculate for some kind of a slack. So how much time do I have between my committed date and my due date? So if I can set this up so it's a positive value if I'm going to deliver it ahead of time, or a negative value if I plan to be late.
Exactly. So let me show you really quickly an example of how this works. I made a custom action to just show you DateSubtract in action. So here we have today, October 27th, and we're going to go back 3 weeks. And if I hit OK and working days is false, it'll show the difference is 21 days, 3 calendar weeks. But if I do the same thing, go back 3 weeks and make working days true, it'll show it's 15 days, which is 3 work weeks.
That's pretty handy. Now, if I can ask you a question about how you've demonstrated this, you're showing us a number of 21 or a number of 15, which look like numbers, but behind the scenes, this is actually returned as a duration, correct? Not a number?
Yes, Kim, that is true.
Right. And so what you've done in that business rule, you simplified it to display a number of days, but do remember it's a duration. So when you use this, it could easily return hours or whatever. And so you'd have to reformat that.
Correct.
Now, Kyle, you mentioned the idea of using this feature to calculate a countdown. Can you show us an example of how you do that?
Exactly. So if you look here, I added a field called days until due date.
All right. And that could easily be some other custom field like days until a go live date or something like that, right?
Exactly. And I created a custom action where every time I run the custom action, it will show me how many days I have from today, whatever day I run that custom action, until the due date. So I create a custom action. I select the project I want to see the due date on. Go to my custom action, update due date counter. And there we go. From
That,
today, we see we have 30 calendar days until the due date.
that's pretty good. Now, in practice, I guess you wouldn't do this through a custom action, right? You would use something like a scheduled workflow rule that runs every night.
Exactly. So if you had a scheduled workflow rule that updated this every day, then every day you'd have an updated view of how many days until the due date of that project.
Very good. Now, can you show us behind the scenes and how this custom action is put together?
Absolutely. Okay, so if you look at the custom action, you'll see I have date subtract, the due date. Today is the second parameter, and I'm dividing it by 1 day, because one thing important to note is that if you don't divide it by the amount of days, it's going to default to giving you the duration in hours. So instead of giving it a bunch of hours, I'm telling it to give it to me in days. And you'll also notice after today, I don't have the third true false parameter, and therefore it's defaulting to false, which is why in the example we just saw, it told me that the difference between today, which is October 27th, and the selected due date of the project, which is November 25th, it came back as 30 days. So those are calendar days.
Very good. And one thing I'd like to call out just and to repeat is that if you want to convert this duration into a number of days, you divide it by days one. And that's a technique that we use in configurations.
And you could do the same thing with, if you wanted to see how many months until the due date, you could put months parentheses 1.
And it would give you a decimal in return, correct?
That is correct.
Right. One other thing I'd like to point out here is the use of the today function. Here we're looking at the difference between today and the due date. And the reason that we didn't simply put this into a calculation field is that in a calculation field, you cannot use the today function. Because if you think of it, today is a date, today would always be evaluating over and over and over and over. It would burn all the cycles. And so you can only use the today function in something like a business rule, a custom action, scheduled workflow, and that kind of thing.
Exactly. So there's a couple important points to know about date subtract. The third parameter, when you build this in a configuration, the first 2 parameters are mandatory. You have to have the 2 dates. However, the third parameter, which is the true or false to tell the system is working, is optional. And if you don't use it, the default value is false. So if nothing is in its place, it is going to give you the outcome in calendar days. One other thing to keep in mind is, like in math, the larger number needs to come first. So the date in the future is the date you'll put in the first parameter, and the date in the past will be the second parameter. Otherwise, it will show a negative number.
Which sometimes you might want that, like when we talked about contingency or my buffer between my committed and my due date, I might want that to be positive at one case and then negative if we flip to having a late date.
Exactly. A couple things to remember with date subtract is that if you've seen the video for date add, the syntax is not the exact inverse. Whereas in date add, you have a date and a duration as your 2 parameters. Here, the parameters are 2 dates. So date subtract is not simply the inverse of date add. If you want to use date add with inverted functionality, do not use date subtract. Rather, use date add with a negative number in the second parameter.
Absolutely. And we go more into that in that date add video, which is a really good one. This next point, if you don't mind, I'll take this one, which is make sure you have a clear understanding of how days are counted when writing the rule. Because remember, these are not just dates you're subtracting from each other. These are date times, and we're looking for a duration in between them. And so depending on the time that's associated with it, the duration is going to be different. It may not be a full day. We might have a couple hours difference between a couple date time.
That's a good point. And a side point to that is also make sure how your working days are counted in the system.
Absolutely. Because when we have the flag for working days turned on, then if I've got holidays or vacations in there for the instance, that could affect that.
Exactly.
And that's DateSubtract. All right. Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you, Kim.
All right. And for our viewers, if you have more questions on this function or want some additional help, just hit us up on our website at kolmegroup.com. If you found this video useful and are really ready to take your Clarissen skills to the next level, check out the link below for Kolme University, where you learn all kinds of great Clarissen skills and techniques. You can also reach out to us for individual consulting and training for you and your organization.